Thanks for tuning in today. I'm Dr. Nick, the Incrementalist. Join me as I seek out the small incremental changes being applied in other industries that we can learn from and that can be applied in healthcare. Can these changes bring immediate value, but also add up to the big improvements and revolution we need in healthcare? Come along with me to explore the possibilities. My innovative guests from around the globe have used small incremental improvements to achieve their moonshot.
And today, I'm delighted to be joined by Adnan Iqbal and Tashfeen Ekram. Adnan is the Chief Executive Officer for Luma Health, and Tashfeen is the Chief Medical Officer for Luma Health. He's also a radiologist, and they're both co-founders of that organization. Adnan and Tashfeen, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having us. We're thrilled to be here.
Thank you so much.
So if we could, let's kick off. I always like to. I think it's important to understand a little bit of the background of you, the individual, and some of your context to this. If I may, I'm going to start with you, Tashfeen. You're a radiologist, but tell us a little bit about your journey to where you are as a radiologist, but also as a co-founder of this organization.
Yeah, no, I'd love to talk about some of my background. So I grew up in the Bay Area, and my dad was a techie, so that kind of was something that was ingrained in me very early on. So I had this kind of nerdy bent to me from my early days. But then as an undergrad, when I was at Berkeley, I started realizing kind of my passion for science, but also my desire to want to help people. And then that eventually landed me in medical school in the Midwest. But I always wanted to kind of go back to my, techie background or my techie roots. And so that's how I kind of ended up in radiology. But eventually, as kind of my journey through my clinical years early on, I found some challenges, and which kind of led to the early foundings of Luma Health. But I found radiology for me as a good way to combine both my interest in helping patients, but also satisfying my intellectual curiosity on the technical side of things.
Fantastic. And Adnan, if you could share a little bit of your background and also the sort of foundational story that sort of got you to this point.
Sure, absolutely. So I'm a biologist by background, so I've been in the healthcare and life science space for well over 15 years. The folks, can hear this, can't see me, but that's the grays in the beard here. But, studied biology as undergrad at Berkeley. Kind of the fun fact here is Tashfeen and I were college roommates as undergrads. We shared a little 700 square foot apartment together. And then he eventually went off to Michigan Medical School, trained there, practiced there. Tashfeen is being very humble. He is, a practicing physician, a self-taught coder. He was one class shy of being a double major in molecular cell biology and computer science while at Berkeley. So,
Wow.
He's pretty wicked when it comes to, what he called his techie side of things. So it's more than just a passion and interest. He's actually, formally trained there, in addition to being formally trained as a physician. But, I grew up as, I decided to go to grad school in the UK to study biotechnology and bioscience. And so I studied proteins. Proteins were my jam, primarily in inflammatory disease and oncology. And while I was at Cambridge, I had a chance to co-found a medical device startup with one of my classmates. So it was a little box to diagnose tuberculosis. I didn't quite end up doing what we wanted to do, but I caught the bug, if you will. And I knew at some point in my life, I wanted to come back to being part of an early team and hopefully having the chance to build something from the ground up. But I really grew up as a biologist and as a healthcare professional at Genentech, so a very large, innovative biotech company here in the San Francisco Bay Area, and was there for a little over 5 years and had a chance to really taste the rainbow from starting off in operations and manufacturing where real biotech happened. So the stuff I used to do at my bench, I now had to scale to a 10,000 liter tank, so a crap ton more proteins. But my passion led me to lead Genentech's, my passion for the pipeline led me to lead Genentech's early stage R&D finance strategy for their neuroscience and oncology portfolio. So I still got to wear my scientist hat, but learn the business. And then eventually had a chance to lead sales and marketing for immunology product that Genentech had to market, a treatment for chronic condition rheumatoid arthritis. And after 5 years there, I found it was time for me to take a sabbatical, went to business school. And that's where Tashfeen and I reconnected. So Tashfeen was finishing up his fellowship at Stanford Hospital in cardiac imaging. I was finishing up business school there. And really, we would nerd out and hang out at Stanford Hospital's cafeteria and talk about a lot of the different pain points, challenges, inefficiencies in healthcare. And we started with something super simple, something that I'd experienced firsthand as a patient and Tashfeen had experienced as a doctor. And, all of us have experienced it either directly or through a loved one. And very simply, it's patients are waiting weeks to months to be able to get to care in the outpatient setting. And really, that was that original kernel that we started with and led to what now is Luma Health.
And my understanding of that was you had a torn ACL, I think, and you were struggling to get, in the first instance, just imaging. That's obviously right in Tashfeen's zone, and he was there, and you were unable to get imaging. Was the corollary true that Tashfeen was sitting there and, there was no way that he could have managed to deliver any of that imaging? What was going on there?
Yeah, no, great question. So I played soccer as an undergrad at Berkeley. I tore my ACL my sophomore year. I called the Palo Alto Medical Foundation, which is, a large group here in the San Francisco Bay Area, to get an MRI scheduled. And they told me it would be 3 weeks before I get an MRI, which is, a pretty par for the course experience for most patients. And I was that annoying dude who on Monday in between classes, because I had some free time, and I really wanted to get back on the soccer field quickly, I called the clinic 10 times. And Tuesday, an appointment opened up. I had my MRI, and Friday I had surgery. So I was on my path to healing in 4 days, rather than waiting 3 weeks just to get the process started. Right. And in full candor, I was, in my early 20s. I could have crushed around for 3 weeks, and I would have gone to the same health outcome just 3 weeks later. What we found is, your average American today, they're sick, their loved one's sick, and every day that goes by, their likelihood to get a better health outcome is genuinely deteriorating. And Tashfeen saw the same in his clinic at Michigan, where he had patients waiting up to 6 weeks at times to see him. And every day when he would come in, he'd see there's 8 openings in his calendar that have popped up. And he's thinking to himself, why are my patients waiting weeks to months to get to care when I could and should see them today? And so that's where we started. And so just, being good nerds on campus, we wanted to test what's unique to us and our own experience, what's unique to the imaging and radiology space, which is true across the spectrum of healthcare. And so we ran a study with a little over 100 doctors. And when you're a student, everyone tells you the truth. No one sugarcoats anything. And so what we learned is, your average patient is waiting 2.5 to 12 weeks to get to care in the U.S., right? It depends what part of the country the patient lives in, depends on what type of care they need. And the same clinics, whether it's a 2-doctor clinic or an incredibly large health system with thousands of doctors, and really everyone in between, your integrated delivery networks, your accountable care organizations, your academic medical centers, your large health systems, your community health systems, your private clinics, that on average, they were sitting on about a 15 to 30% unused capacity rate on any given day. And so you had people waiting for needing care, and you had care available, but no simple, easy way to connect those patients to care. And that was really where we started, where we said there's got to be a real-time, automated, text-first way, like no app, no download, no login, no portal way to, 1, identify patients who are waiting for care, 2, identify real dynamic availability in a clinic schedule, and then 3, the magic wand, of course, how do you make sure you match the right patient to the right care?
Yeah, so I imagine from a clinical standpoint, that's got to be frustrating to have people that show up, 2.5 to 12, that's 3 months for imaging, and yet you go in on a daily basis and you were seeing gaps in your schedule that could have been used. Why is that going on? What's happening?
Yeah, I think there's probably a few things. One is I think the economics of it were such that it didn't incentivize imaging centers or healthcare systems to really optimize schedule. And this is not to say that they're not looking to optimize their business processes, but I think the economics weren't quite there. But I think as we've moved year and year, and as the margins and as I think the pressures are being kind of put further on a lot of these imaging centers, and more so just the healthcare system in general to become more efficient, I think now they're starting to look at ways to try to solve this. And I think the other piece of it is that in order to be able to do a lot of what we've done, what Adnan was talking about, orchestrating these messages and matching these patients, it was actually deep integration into the EMR, because you really need to understand what is the kind of patient that is the appropriate for this kind of type of appointment. And I think the advantage that we have that wasn't there 10 years ago is that the walls of the integration and the challenges around that are slowly starting to break down. Well, not break down, I should say, but we're able to overcome them. And I think so. The two things have kind of come together where it's aligned well for us, being able to really prosper in this. And that, again, the economics are a little bit like where healthcare systems are now looking at to say, hey, how can we optimize our schedule, because it actually is making a difference on our bottom line. And 2 is now we can actually do it because the data silos that existed within the EMRs are not so much data silos anymore, and you can actually get all this data out and be able to take advantage of it.
So I have to ask this question. Was there a pivotal napkin that you drew upon and came up with this idea, or was it a little bit more involved than that?
No, Tashfeen, it was pretty much that, right?
They say that's what happens, right?
Yeah, we were both on campus, like I said, and this would quite literally happen over lunch or any break Tashfeen had while we were at Stanford Hospital's cafeteria, and it started off with and everyone teases me I still use pencil and paper here, but it would start off with a bunch of scribbles and just some early ideas there, and Tashfeen touched upon the challenges, right? The financial incentives not being aligned, the data and integration challenges, especially with EHRs being incredibly closed and often clunky systems. And then I think 3 was we just felt that the timing was right, that our belief early on now, nearly 6.5, 7 years ago, was that the US healthcare system will come to a place where they finally start to think about the patient as a customer, right? And wanting to engage and own and automate and understand that patient as a customer, much like we do in every other aspect of our life. And I think traditionally that's not been true. Traditionally, healthcare in the US has thought about the patient as a resource, where the patient comes in, a care team or a set of care providers do certain things, and they type in codes in an EHR and they get paid, right? And I think that really over the past 6.5, 7 years has started to change, where healthcare is now really wanting to understand the patient as a customer, to think about the patient as a customer, not just when the patient's in front of you, but when they go home, and really thinking about that entire lifetime journey of the patient as a customer. And then how do you own and automate that journey and really capture that lifetime value of the patient as a customer? Again, things that are very simple, well understood concepts in every other part of our life, when we're online shopping, when we're engaging with an app, what have you, but really as the financial incentives, the underlying data and integration challenges, and of course, just the mental model has shifted in healthcare. It really makes this, ripe for making the types of changes that we are. And the goal here, of course, is to change the way that patients interact with healthcare. And needing to see a doctor is hard, but actually being able to see a doctor shouldn't be. And unfortunately, today it is still quite challenging, and that's really what we're excited about changing.
So for those of you just joining, I'm Dr. Nick, the Incrementalist, and today I'm talking to Adnan Iqbal. He's the Chief Executive Officer, and Dr. Tashfeen Ekram. He is the Chief Medical Officer. They're both co-founders of Luma Health. We were just talking about the sort of original genesis of the product, the concept. Tell us a little bit about those first instances. I mean, you had an idea. Lots of people have ideas, but you've actually produced something that's servicing millions of patients right now. You've solved the problem. You're helping, both sides of that equation, if there is indeed both sides. I think everybody's pulling in the right direction, but, there are competing issues. What were the early challenges that you sort of focused on that allowed you to get something to marketplace?
Yeah, great question. So, I think we were 2 dudes with an idea and a smile, right? And that's where it began. And Tashfeen again is the R&D wizard, right? So he had started to, because of a pain point he was experiencing in his everyday life as a physician, has started to piece together a prototype. And as what happened, most of my classes when I was at Stanford Business School were actually at the computer science school. And so I had, become semi-dangerous. But the 2 of us were able to, hack together an early prototype. And the challenge, I'd say, really came down to one, which was, can we get access to the right data points within an electronic health record to be able to truly automate these things, right? So that there isn't a requirement for care teams, scheduling staff, care coordinating staff to have to do double data entry. They'll have to flip back and forth between different windows on their computer, right? So that was challenge 1. And then challenge 2 was really, how do we actually get this in the hands of real clinics, real patients, and real healthcare provider teams? And that's hard because really, most of the folks in that space have not been well served by technology in the past. And, that's really changed over the past 5 to 6 years, but kind of, if you look back in 2014 when we were, students on campus, people were healthcare providers, clinics, hospitals were they didn't trust technology because they had poor experience with EHRs. People had always overpromised, underdelivered, and they'd really been burned by tech. And so just getting those first set of early users was a real challenge. And now we were fortunate that Tashfeen is a physician, that we happened to be on a campus where we could access the medical school there, and that we had a network of friends and family who were in the healthcare space. And so we would, we would knock on doors and call people and just get people to just use it and poke at it and break it and help us understand what this would actually take for it to really be beneficial and impactful for patients, and also easy to use, both for patients and for whoever the super users would be at a clinic or a hospital or health system.
So how much of this do you think is centered on the fact that you blend both actual practical clinical user experience, but you're also sounds, the coder behind the integration. So you understood the underneath the hood, as they would say here, of how to plumb in those pipes, Tashfeen. You must have dived deep into this to sort of start to build this out.
Yeah, I think, I think that one of the advantages that we did have, we had a little bit of inside knowledge on how things worked, because I think what sometimes happens is, particularly with technology enthusiasts, is that they look from the outside at a problem, and which is great because sometimes you do need a third perspective, someone from outside the system, because sometimes we drink our own Kool-Aid. But at the same time, I think some technology enthusiasts will look at something from the outside, like healthcare problems, but not be able to not have a good understanding of how things actually work, but think that just throwing technology at it will solve the problem. And I think this was one of our early learnings, is that technology is not needed to solve every problem, but if you are definitely using technology to solve a problem, it has to work in the context of healthcare. It has to actually have an understanding of how workflows are, because the worst thing that you can do is you walk into a clinic and say, here's a great solution that will solve your problem, but there's 7 things you have to learn to do. Here's 7 clicks you have to do it, and you're going to have to completely change your workflow, and that's completely a no-go. So I think what really helped us early on too was being to have a kind of an understanding of how operationally things work on the other side of the desk, and also just having kind of an understanding of like what it takes to successfully get into an EMR and get what data elements that we needed to be able to do all the matching that we do.
So there has to be some secret to getting access. I mean, I know back in 2013 that was a nosebleed then. It still is to some degree, but you've managed to do that. Were there any sort of insights you learned along the way? Should you go after the big integration, go after the small? Anything in there that you go, wow, if knowing that now, that's what we should have done?
Yeah, do you want to answer that one, Adnan? Okay, I'll go. Yeah. So I think, I think in hindsight, we tackled one of the toughest problems, which is scheduling. And getting scheduling data is actually not easy. And we started tackling it early on before a lot of the open standards available. And even now, I mean, I think to say that there's a standard available is not quite accurate. It's kind of a non-standard standard. But I think what we really realized is that the ones we decided to tackle first were the ones that were open and engaging with us. And so they were the slightly more agile, smaller EMR systems that serviced a smaller clinic population, a smaller size of smaller provider-sized clinics, which actually worked out to our benefit because these were clinics that were also had a lot more economic pressures on them, and they were more interested in optimizing workflow, optimizing their bottom line. And so it kind of aligned very well with the ideal customer profile that we were looking for, but also these were using EMRs that were open to having discussions with us. And so I think that was really what gave us a lot of the initial data points and success stories of showing that what we were trying to accomplish actually works in the real world. And then from there, as the integration or as the data API integration story progressed, more EMR started opening up, and that kind of lended us to be able to kind of go up and start working with some of the larger EMRs that were out there, and being able to drive some of the similar success stories with some larger EMR/larger clients.
So I want to read it back to you because I think it's an important point in terms of that sort of incremental learning point is perfect it, but not with the large players, so that you understood the pieces that you really wanted for what was, an incredibly tough problem, what people tend to call wicked problems. And then you could go, and I'm imagining that you sounded way more appropriate in terms of your asks and the discussions when you got to these larger organizations. Is that a sort of fair assessment?
Yeah, I think absolutely. And that's true not only from the technical challenges, but also just from our go-to-market set of challenges and the company evolution. And I think this year at Tashfeen and I we're very fortunate that we happened to be on a campus where there was an academic medical center. And James Hereford, who was the chief operating officer of the Stanford Health System at that time, was very candid with us. He said, "Hey, look, this is a great idea. You have some early traction. You have a prototype. there's two places you can enter the market, right? You can enter the market working with small clinics or very large health systems. And if you want to go that route of working with large health systems, you have to be incredibly well capitalized, but you also have to be game ready, and you don't have a lot of room to make any mistakes. If you enter with small clinics, you have the opportunity there to have real partners who are going to help you, not with an immediate set of problems, but also share a lot about what other problems they have, be partners in providing you a lot of rich feedback. And so that approach for us really worked, and we called it the quote unquote graduate up approach. And the goal with that was, one, start with small clinics where it was all about speed. So we get the product in as many real users' hands quickly as possible. So we could go from that, smart wait list and a set of early communication tools to a full suite and a full breadth of enterprise product and platform quickly. Two, as an early stage startup, you really want to start generating revenue quickly. And so the small, medium clinic segment really allowed us to do that, where it was a 2 to 12 week sales cycle, not 9 to 18 months to be able to get something in real people's hands. And then three, most importantly, we really wanted to be able to unlock the proof points, the case study, the ROI metrics, increase in revenue, increase in clinic capacitization, increase in patient engagement and response rates across age group, demographic, socioeconomic status, clinic type, specialty, geography, etc. And that data package then allowed us to go from small clinics to more mid-market regional groups, and then ultimately to the very large health systems like the likes of UCSF, Banner Health, Ascension, etc. And so that approach, again, we were very lucky to have someone like James in our court, has been beneficial for every element of the company, not just, of course, from the integration side, but especially from the integration side. We were able to build a real knowledge base there. And Aditya, who's our third founder, who wasn't able to join today, really sharpen our integration abilities. And that has become a nice moat around our business, that we have the deepest set of integrations across the most number of EHRs. And that, was because of that approach that we took.
So if you could just try and summarize the key sort of differentiation points of your solution that really sort of sets you apart, and talk a little bit about COVID-19, if you can, and how that sort of impacted your, the workflow for the coming, what's happened and, what's going to happen in the future.
Sure. So I'll quickly touch upon the differentiation, and then I'll let Tashfeen speak to COVID and what it's meant for us in this space, and really what the next normal of healthcare will look like. So from a differentiation standpoint, communicating with patients, engaging patients, scheduling patients, all those are pain points that have been around for quite a long time. And I think really as we've grown and gone from a set of point solutions that are communication tools to becoming the end-to-end patient clinic communication called the patient journey automation platform, what's really differentiating for us there, it comes down to two things. One is that depth of EHR integration, where we're not just limited to the scheduled or practice management module, we actually understand the clinical source of truth. So really allows us to have very powerful, tailored, customized conversation with patient around their specific disease, their diagnosis, their unique care journey and care plan. So that's part one of it. And, unfortunately, there's a lot of players in this space that make a lot of promises, and then they're viewed as vaporware, right, by clinics, hospitals, health systems, because they can tell the story, but the technology actually can't manifest that level of automation, that level of depth and connectivity to the electronic health record, which at the end of the day is a clinic, a hospital, health system's core source of truth. So that's kind of area one. And then area two is the ability to go from having 6, 8, 9, 10 point solutions that solve bits and pieces of problems along the patient journey to actually having a true seamless end-to-end platform. So that breadth of touch points with the patient before, during, between, and after an appointment that are real-time, automated, text first, multilingual. We have 20 languages out of the box, and intelligent. These are bots having a conversation with the patient before, during, between, and after an appointment to help a patient get to the right care with the right doctor quickly, make sure they come back and keep coming back. And of course, care doesn't end just because you left the 4 walls of the clinic. How do you effectively guide the patient in between and after visits, and then nudge them to get back to the right care with the right doctor quickly? So that's, at a high level, the two areas that really have allowed us to succeed. And today work with, a little over 16 million unique patients on the platform, a little over 450 clinics, hospitals, health systems as real customers and partners for us across the U.S. And then let Tashfeen take over and talk about COVID and what that means for us today and going forward.
So yeah, the COVID has been a very challenging, I think, just for us as a healthcare system in the U.S., but all broadly. But what's been really interesting is that it has really put the healthcare system at test and really forced us to make decisions that we've been talking about for the last 10 years, which is about digitizing the healthcare experience. And just could tell you a quick anecdote. I think what the anecdote will really drive is that we all become more comfortable with healthcare. We have a client on our system who's using our telehealth services who said he would never use telehealth and never use videos for doing appointments. We as physicians love to put our hands on our patients and see them in front, and we're just not used to it. We're just not comfortable with it. This patient was scheduled prior to COVID, and then the client switched over to telehealth visits. And this patient that he was supposed to see had a growth in his mouth and was suspicious for cancer just based on the history that they had. And so he did this visit over telehealth, had the patient hold the camera onto his mouth, open it up, and he was able to make the diagnosis over the phone, so to say, over a telehealth visit. But what this really showed to him, who was later in his career, that you can actually deliver healthcare over telehealth. And I think this anecdote really drives that we as a healthcare system, both from the provider standpoint and the patient standpoint, are much more comfortable in receiving and delivering healthcare over a distance, or using what we can call telemedicine as a very broad term. And I think this has worked well for us because it's drawn a lot of interest to a lot of the things that we've been doing for the last 5 or 6 years. But now I think it's coming to fruition, whereas before it was kind of like a nice thing to help you differentiate yourself from other folks in your system, in your locality, but now it's becoming a necessity just to be able to survive in the COVID world.
Fantastic. Unfortunately, as usual, we've run out of time, so it just remains for me to thank you, Adnan.
Thank you very much. Thanks so much for having us.
And Tashfeen, thank you for joining me.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.
Thanks for joining me today. Do you have any better ideas, or have you found a small incremental change that's brought about a big improvement in your world? Let's continue the conversation on our hashtag, the Incrementalist, or share with me at DrNick1 on Twitter. You can find more information about the show on our program page at healthcarenowradio.com, and tune in next time to hear my discussions with leaders and innovators from around the globe who've revolutionized their space by using small incremental improvements to achieve their moonshot. I'm Dr. Nick, the Incrementalist, and I'm starting a revolution through evolution.